All right, check this out. Right here are 33 names. 33 men who, over 100 years ago, competed in perhaps the craziest sports contest that humanity has ever witnessed. A 6-day-long roller skating race that occurred back in 1885. Now, what I want you to do here, before we go any further into the story, is pick one of these guys. Pick a favorite, a hero, a champion, a vessel for your very own heart and soul. Someone that you are gonna root for as this video and this competition progresses. Now don't worry, I'm not gonna lock you in anything here. You are totally free to change your favorite at any point as we go through this race. But for now, I just want you to, head into this thing with someone to root for. Because that's what makes sports fun, right? So go ahead and make your pick. I'll give you a second to think about it. All right, you got your guy? Good. Let's just hope you didn't pick one of the 17 skaters that quit the race. Or even worse, one of the 2 that get killed by it. Welcome to Hell on Skates. Alright, so I don't want to bore you with a whole ton of backstory here. I just kind of want to get into the race. But I do feel like I gotta offer at least some sort of explanation for how something as insane as a 6-day roller skating race can actually happen. So let me just give you a super quick rundown. Basically, this whole event was kind of like the amalgamation of 2 really big trends that were springing up all around the United States back in the late Victorian era. On one hand, we have roller skating, which was absolutely booming back in the 1880s. Roller rinks were popping up all over the country. Newspapers were abuzz with the phenomenon of rinkomania. It was just a huge trend. And then on the other hand, we have 6-day running races. A very strange little fad that I'm sure most of you have never heard of today. But trust me when I tell you that back near the end of the 19th century-ish, 6-day running races were a massive attraction. They were popularized by P.T. Barnum back in the 1870s, and these races quickly became premier sporting events for athletes that wanted to test their endurance at the highest of levels. And the rules are pretty simple too. You just run as far as you can in 6 days, and that is literally it. You can leave the track whenever you want. You can try and keep walking for 6 days straight without sleeping if you want. It is totally up to you. And let me tell you, people loved these things. A well-marketed 6-day race with the right athletes would pull in thousands of spectators, no problem. So it was only a matter of time before some crafty event promoter would come up with the idea to combine the 2 hottest fads in the country, and then boom, there we go. The 6-day roller skating race was born. March 2nd, Madison Square Garden, 1885, the first of its kind, advertising out the wazoo. This thing was set to be one for the ages. Oh, I should specify though that there actually was one other 6-day roller skating race before this one. A few months before our race, somebody ran a 6-day roller skating race up in Boston, but that really wasn't a true 6-day race because the rule set at that Boston race limited the amount of time that anyone could stay on the track to only 12 hours a day. Whereas with our New York race, there is no restriction whatsoever. In this race, you can literally stay on the rink and skate for 24 hours of every day for 6 days straight if you want, which is pretty wild, right? I mean, but being a ridiculous event was kind of the whole appeal of this thing. I mean, it really was the ultimate test of roller skating endurance. So athletes from all over the place made the journey to NYC to match their guts against the best of the roller skating world. We got Irish, the self-proclaimed best roller skater in the United Kingdom. We got Elks, the champion of Troy, New York. Maddox, the best skater in the state of Maine. But hey, at the same time, it's not all distinguished skaters that we got out here either. For every pro, we got a complete amateur. Donovan, for example, is a total unknown. He's a newsboy who had to walk 200 miles from his hometown of Elmira, New York to even make it to the 6-day race. He had no money to get a ride, so it was either his feet or nothing, right? Or hey, how about Cohen, a grocery store clerk from Brooklyn. The only reason this guy's in the race is because he just got fired from his job and he's hoping to win some prize money to support his wife and kids. So we got people from all walks of life coming down to compete in this thing. But out of all 33 names down there, one in particular is far and away the most well-known. Frank Hart, a truly remarkable sportsman and surprisingly well-known for the time celebrity who is pretty much just evaporated from public consciousness today. You see, back in 1885, Frank Hart was the guy when it came to six-day races. All throughout the end of the 19th century, Frank Hart was absolutely dominating these contests. Like, here he is winning a race in 1882. Here's another one 15 years later in 1897. Here he is taking home $16,000 for winning a race back in 1880. Like, that is close to $500,000 in today's money. And this dude was famous too. Like, six-day races were red hot back then, so the best competitor is gonna get a ton of attention. Like, it was not uncommon for newspapers to call this dude the champion pedestrian of the world, the head of the world's pedestrians. Frank Hart beats the world. Like, this dude had legions of fans piling into arenas to watch him race. He was a big deal. But with all that being said, Frank Hart also faced a ton of adversity during his rise to the top, mostly because he was a black man. Yeah, 65 years before MLB integration, over a quarter century before Jack Johnson won the boxing heavyweight title, this guy was out there competing and winning against white athletes. So, as you might expect, a lot of people back then really didn't take too kindly to his dominance. You know, white racers would oftentimes try to get Frank disqualified before the race even started or refuse to compete against him. Spectators would sometimes line up on the railing of the running track and then throw black pepper into his eyes whenever he ran by them. Like, this guy had to deal with a ton of crap. But man, at the same time, he did not just roll over and take it either. Like, Frank Hart had a real backbone on him. He would put $1,000 bets up against anyone who thought they could beat him in a race. He took the nickname Black Dan and wore like a badge of honor. And sometimes he would yell back at hecklers that he's about to go out there and break the hearts of all the other racers. Like I don't know about you guys, but I think it is a real shame that this dude is not more well known. Like, he's got a real interesting story. And I am willing to bet that it is because of that interesting story that a whole bunch of you right now might be swapping around your picks for this race. And I don't blame you, because Frank Hart, he definitely seems like a great guy to cheer for. But I do gotta tell you one last thing about Frank Hart. And I hate to be the bearer of bad news here, but Frank does not know how to roller skate. Like, at all. Not even a little. As best as I can tell, he's basically just entering this race to see what the whole roller skating hullabaloo is all about. You know, he's just dipping his toe into the waters of another sport, trying to figure out what the big deal is. So, spoiler alert, don't expect too much from our friend Frank here. Anyway though, before we get to the actual race, there is one more very important thing that you should know about these competitors, and that is their ages. You see, these guys, they're not all seasoned athletic veterans, and they're not even all adults. There are a ton of teenagers in this competition. Like O'Melia, for example, is an Irish kid that's only 15 years old. Like, is that not insane? They're letting 15-year-olds compete in 6-day-long ultra-endurance roller skating competitions with no break requirements. Like, that's just wild. But all right, enough backstory. I think it's about time we get into the race itself. So, without further ado, let me roll back the clock to 12 o'clock midnight on March 2nd, 1885. Yeah, for whatever reason, they decided to start this thing off at midnight. So the very first stretch of racing that these guys have to do is through the wee hours of the morning. But hey, we're off. The race has started. The sound of skates on wood is now permeating through Madison Square Garden. Now, one very cool thing about this race is the absolutely insane amount of press coverage that it got. Like, reporters from all over the country came to New York to write about this contest. So basically every single step of this thing was extremely well documented, to the point where I even got hour by hour breakdowns of everybody's score. which is why I made this big chart down here to help keep track of how all the skaters are doing as we go through the race. Now we're gonna be relying on this chart a lot, so I thought it'd be a good idea to maybe use the first few hours of the race to just explain how to read it. So let's go ahead and move the clock up to 1 a.m. on the first day. We are now 1 hour into the race. And there we go. It looks like a hot contest already. A three-way tie for first. Walton, Maddox, and Small are all battling it out for that top spot. Now let's go ahead and scooch forward just a little more to 5 a.m. And hey, we got some big changes already. Okay, so here is how you read this thing. First off, in the corner, I will always have the day and time. So if you ever get lost, just check right there and you can figure out exactly where we are in the race. And as for the columns in the chart, this one here has the name of the racers. This one has what place they are in. This one lists how many miles the racer has covered. And then this one at the end tells you how many places that racer has gained or fallen since the last chart. Like for example, Maddox here was in first place on our last chart, and now he's fallen down to 6th. So he's got a big -5 in that last column. And then on the flip side, Meyer went all the way from 23rd to 12th. So he has a nice big green 11 there to mark his progress. So I hope that makes sense. Oh, and by the way, these last 5 racers here, they don't actually have 0 miles. It's just that sometimes the reporters wouldn't even bother to print the scores of the racers who are doing the worst. So we don't even actually know how these 5 were doing at this point in the race. But that's about to change, because by 11 a.m., we've got accurate mileage counts for everybody. And we've also got our first set of major developments among the skaters. For starters, we've already got our first dropouts, Brennan and Smith. Both guys withdrew from the race during like the early morning hours of day 1 for reasons that the newspapers don't mention. And O'Melia, that 15-year-old Irish kid, he also was kind of threatening to quit too. He came down with a pretty severe stomach cramp around 4 a.m. that forced him off the track for a couple hours, but he didn't let that get him down. By 11, he's back on the track and ready to go. But despite a few dropouts and stomach aches here and there, at this point in the race, pretty much everyone seems like they're doing pretty good. Spirits are high, everyone's looking fresh, and around here is when the reporters, they just start kind of writing down all the weird little observations that they're noticing about the racers. Like for example, Cohen is out there skating around with a polka dot tie on for some reason, flapping in the wind behind him. Ward is wearing this big, beautiful yellow and black sweater. He's the bumblebee of the track, if you will. And Aukenbrandt, for some reason, is like absolutely convinced that the scores table is gonna miss his laps if he doesn't remind them. So every single time he goes past the table, he yells at them, "Hey, write that down, that was a lap, that was a lap." Oh, by the way, this track is only 1/8 of a mile long too, so he's literally doing that 8 times every mile. That's like more than once a minute. Like, hey, did you get that? That was a lap, that was a lap. Did you get that one? Did you get that one? Oh yeah, and Aukenbrandt, he also just kind of like disappears around 7 a.m. Like he doesn't formally tell anyone that he's quitting or anything like that. He just like leaves the track and then doesn't come back. Remember that for me. It's gonna be important later. But Aukenbrandt, though, he is far from the only guy doing some strange stuff out there. Like, how about we check in on Elks, that champion from Troy, New York? A reporter from the Boston Globe points out that Elks is skating around carrying a bottle of iodine in his hand. And he's got these 2 big, like, rust-colored spots on the knees of his tights. And it's because as he's going around the track, he's just pouring iodine into his hand and rubbing down his knees while he's skating, trying to keep him nice and fresh. Ooh, and how about Welch? According to reporters, this guy's just skating like a crazy person. He gets on the track and he just blows around at Mach 10 for like 2 miles. And then he just totally slows back down to a crawl. Starts lazing around the rink, talking to all his friends who are hanging out on the railing. And his strategy is not working for him because he's sitting way down at 21st, right? But out of all these guys, far and away, the man who is getting the most attention is Walton, the skater who is sitting up in first place. At the moment, Walton is 6 miles ahead of his nearest competitor, which is pretty nuts when you consider that we're not even 1/10 of the way through the competition yet. According to all these reporters, Walton is just destroying everybody else. Like, he is literally being described as a wonder. He's out there, apparently not even tired yet, whipping around the track with a handkerchief tied around his head that's like flapping around in the wind behind him. And he's even like toying a bit with the other skaters. Like, right after he completes his 100th mile, he turns on the jets and just roars around the track. And a whole bunch of other skaters like try to keep up to him. But even with 100 miles of roller skating under his belt, he is just smoking everybody as if they are standing still, according to one reporter. And Walton's a little cocky about all this too. He's skating around the outside of the track instead of the inside, which, as you probably know, is a little bit slower because you have more ground to cover on the outside edge than you do on the inside. So one of the reporters asks him why he's doing this, and he says, I'm just passing everybody else so often that I thought it would be easier to skate on the outside where nobody can get in my way. And Walton, he's actually from New York City too, so he's got a ton of fans in the building, right? And they're all feeling pretty confident now that their guy is gonna win this no problem. Although those same fans are just a little bit worried about the guy in second place, Maddox, who you might remember is that skating champion from Maine. And Maddox, he is a proven winner and a well-known skater. Like, he's even wearing all his medals on his chest as he goes around the track, like, just to remind everybody how accomplished he is. But he has been having a little trouble in the race so far though. Like, his knees are kind of stiff, so he's actually applying some ointment to them as he skates around. Ointment, mind you, that he actually makes and sells himself, right? So it's sort of like a primitive version of an athlete today having their own line of sneakers. So as you'll see, Maddox is a real proud and hardworking guy. Like, he's one to keep an eye on for sure. And of course, I guess we should probably swing down to the end of the scoreboard and talk about poor old Frank Hart. As you would probably guess, the guy who doesn't actually know how to roller skate is not doing too well in the roller skating race. Apparently he's basically just like trying to run, but with skates on. Like, he's lifting his feet way up in the air and smacking them down on the ground, like almost kind of like stomping his way around the track. And he's getting kind of sick of it too. Like, one reporter from Milwaukee even overhears Hart telling his trainer that wearing skates feels like he has wings on his feet. Like, he tells his trainer that he wants to just take off the skates and run the rest of the race and try to beat all the skaters on foot. You might notice though that there is one other guy out there who is doing even worse than Hart, and that is our current last place champion, Ford, who is going around the track as if he were on stilts and his joints composed of springs. So I guess he's looking like Inspector Gadget out there bouncing all around. Apparently all the young boys in the audience are literally hanging on the railing and taunting him as he goes around the rink at about 4 miles an hour. And Ford, he's also carrying around some kind of like black bottle with him that he's taking frequent drinks from as he bumbles around the track. We also get our first crash this morning. Goodwin wipes out pretty bad while trying to stop in front of his coach. He ends up having to take like an extended break to rest up his busted up knee and hip. But all right, we've been sitting on one spot for too long, so why don't we move forward a bit to 12 p.m. And not too much has changed. Walton has extended his lead even more. He's now 8 miles ahead of Maddox. Gormley, a 16-year-old kid, is starting to push his way up the ranks. He's made it up to 6th. And Donovan, that newsboy who walked all the way here, has pushed all the way up to the top 4. Pretty impressive for an 18-year-old amateur, right? Especially considering that he's competing against champion skaters. And also right around this time, the spectators start to pour in. We got 600 people up in the stands now watching the racers roar around the track. We also get a whole bunch of people on the track too, kind of. You see, the setup for this track is like kind of super weird. There's an outer track for all the racers to skate on, right? And then on the inside is a smaller track that's open to the public for like a free skate, right? But to make sure that the public skaters don't interfere with the racers, there's actually a bridge that goes over the track that the spectators are supposed to use to pass over the racing track and get down into the free skate track. And this inner track too, it's actually reserved mostly for women and children. So it's basically just kind of like this big party in there full of kids racing around trying to keep up with the skaters. Like, people are laughing, and it seems like a pretty fun environment to be in, honestly. Like, I can imagine how great it would be as like a 10-year-old out on a roller skating rink, and all around you at the same time is all these guys who are just like flying around the track at 100 miles an hour, right? But hey, it gets even better, because right around 11 a.m. a band starts playing, and that really kicks everything into gear. Even the racers now are getting in on the party. 12 of them all get together and start skating around in like a big conga line, which gets all the spectators all hopped up and excited. And for about 20 minutes straight, we get the band jamming and the skaters roaring around in a big line, and the audience just cheering and applauding at a near deafening level. Like, just sounds super fun. Until, unfortunately, the little party comes to an end when the scorers table mistakenly marks that Elks is ahead of Maddox. Yeah, the judges, like every hour, they put up the scores on a big board behind the table for everyone to see. And as soon as Maddox notices that, hey, they've got his score wrong, he is over there and he is making sure to set the record straight, yelling and screaming. Around the same time as the scoring debacle too, we see a really big push from Small, Amelia, and Walton, all of whom start really going on a little spurt, trying to tack a few miles onto their score in a hurry, right? But it's not just these guys that are pushing. Like, pretty much everyone is putting up some insane numbers on the scoreboard right about now. Like 136 miles in 12 hours of roller skating. Like, reporters are describing these scores as unprecedented and surprising to even the professionals themselves. And of course, we also get some more great descriptions of the individual skaters around noon too. Like Ike's, a German skater that we haven't talked about yet. Apparently he's not doing so hot. He's sitting way back in 26th. Maybe the reason for that though is his very strange skating posture. I guess he leans like way back when he skates, so he's just like about to fall onto his back at any moment as he's going around the rink. There's also Robinson, who is doing pretty okay. He's sitting at 15th, but he never closes his mouth. He's always got his jaw hanging open as he goes around, like as if he were trying to catch all the dust in the garden. Elks, his iodine bottle strap, it's not working that well because he's feeling real stiff. Ooh, and right around 12 o'clock, the show promoters set up a big raised platform in the middle of the garden so that a fancy roller skater can go up there and show her stuff. You know, it's really interesting how this event is basically just like a giant variety show, right? Like, we've got music and performers, fancy skaters, and then a whole bunch of people skating for pleasure. And then in the middle of it all, 30 people circling and circling and circling for hours on end. And speaking of hours, why don't we move up an hour to 1 p.m. Ooh, and we got lots of interesting stuff going on here. The first thing you might notice is that Frank Hart has climbed up another spot. He's not second to last anymore. Mostly because he's actually starting to figure out how to roller skate, which makes sense, because if you go out and skate for 46 miles straight, even if you don't know how to do it at all when you first put the skates on, you're gonna start to figure out at least a little bit of what you're doing, right? Small is also climbing the ranks. Since 12:30, he's been leading this small line of skaters that are now shooting around the track so fast that they're filling the room with sawdust. The real story, though, of course, is that three-way tie for first that you might have noticed going on at the top there. It finally looks like Walton might be human. Boyce and Maddox are both catching up to him. But the main reason for this tie is because Walton actually left the track around 12:15. Yeah, he just tells everyone that he's gonna take a little break so he can rest up and slam out 100 miles straight without stopping. And so he just goes and takes a breather. And with him off the track, Walton clocks 0 laps in the last 45 minutes, and Boyce and Maddox have now managed to catch up. Boyce especially is really working hard. He's got this like super wild skating technique where he bends over and then swings his arms back and forth like this, like a pendulum. So he's trying to use his momentum to push himself down the track. And I guess he's doing it so violently that every time he puts a foot down, he weaves halfway across the whole track. So he's basically like slithering along the rink like a snake. And Boyce, you know, he's actually a pretty interesting guy in general too. Like he's another one of the only contestants that we actually have a drawing of. He's only 20 years old and he hasn't even been roller skating for a full year yet, but he's a quick learner and he's certainly putting on a good showing here today. Maddox, our proud main champion, is also stepping it up big time. The quiet rumor among the gamblers in the arena is that pretty soon Maddox is gonna make a break for it and shoot way out ahead of everybody else. But all those hopes of a lead change, they're shut down pretty quick as soon as Walton steps back on the track. See, if we move forward to 2:30 p.m., Walton's already comfortably back in first with a 3-mile lead. It's gonna be tough to catch that guy. By the way, most of our skaters at this point have been on the track for well over 12 hours and some signs of wear and tear are definitely starting to show. Like Ward, a racer from Chicago, is beginning to develop some super deep, dark rings under his eyes. And Shock, another guy from Chicago, he's bent way over as he skates, like so far that he can just about touch the track with his hands if he wanted to. Like his back is just really starting to give out. Worst of all the medical issues though, is the searing headache that most of the skaters have developed. Because apparently no one really thought about how ear-splitting it would be to listen to 30 pairs of roller skates rattle along a plywood track for hours and hours and hours and hours on end, because it is just thunderous. One reporter even describes the sound as similar to steam shooting out of a tea kettle, only so loud that you can't even hear yourself talk. Compounding the noise problem too is just how crappy the actual track is. Like, I guess it's all knotted up and uneven, and Maddox's coach, he even tells one of the reporters that it looks like the event promoter just took a bunch of barn doors and then stitched them together and then laid that down on the ground and called that a roller skating rink. Like that thing, it's just an ugly track apparently. But despite all these issues, one man does not seem to be bothered by anything. Meyer, who is sitting very comfortably smack dab in the middle of the pack. Meyer doesn't seem super concerned with anything, not even going fast. Instead, he's just out there skating around with a real sense of showmanship, trying to play to the crowd. And while everyone else is dressed in like athletic attire, like tights or a sweatshirt, Meyer has got on this like bright blue dress suit, and he's skating around real gracefully, holding a toothpick in his mouth. But somehow that strategy is working out for him, because as we move on up to 5 p.m., we can see that Meyer's broken into the top 15. He's gained 3 spots in the last couple hours. Walton has also pretty much completely regained the massive lead that he lost during his break. He's got 5 miles now between him and second place. But Maddox, he's certainly not giving up. He's been applying that ointment of his very liberally to his knees, and now they're feeling great. Right around here, we also get a pretty funny description of how Cohen skates. He has his legs like spread super wide apart, and he waves his arms over his head as if he is swimming, like this, I guess. And it's such a weird looking style that the other skaters even give him a nickname. They start calling him the windmill of the track. Hey, let's scooch up a little more to 8 p.m. And we get some more pretty bad falls out there. This time by way of Ford, Small, and Maddox. Maddox crash, I guess, is not all that bad. Like, he busts up his hip a little bit, but apparently it's not impeding him too much. He's managing to still hold on to second place. Ford and Small, on the other hand, though, they have what sounds like a pretty insane collision. Because right around 7 p.m., Small, he crashes into the back of Ford and careens off the track so fast that he blasts into the wooden fence surrounding the track and smashes 4 of the support posts into little pieces. Like, pretty crazy to imagine that, right? Just flip off the track, bash a big hole in the railing. But I mean, this is the kind of thing that really highlights the differences between doing a 6-day walking race and a 6-day roller skating race, right? Because these guys, they're really speeding around the track with basically no safety equipment whatsoever. And Small's wounds, I guess they're pretty heavy too. Like, he ends up having to take 3.5 hours to recover. On the lighter side of things though, the atmosphere in the arena is really starting to pick up. By 8 o'clock, we got a pretty colossal 5,000 people sitting up in the bleachers, all ready to see some speed skating. And of course, the amount of casual skaters on the free skating rink has really ballooned too. I mean, we've got 800 people in there now. They're all still trying to match the pace of the speed skaters. And I guess because of how packed the rink is, people are just constantly crashing into each other. That's kind of funny to imagine, right? Like, imagine you're like, you're 12 hours, 18 hours into this race, you're tired, you're exhausted, and you're trying to focus and will yourself to keep moving. But then just on the periphery of your vision, there's all these 12-year-olds like concussing themselves 10 feet away from you. But despite the distractions, over the past few hours, most of these skaters have really been putting on the jets, primarily because of a cash bonus that the promoter has offered. There is a $100 mini prize at stake for whoever has the most miles at the end of the first day. And some of the guys near the top are really gunning for that reward. Because keep in mind, $100 back then would be like winning $3 grand in today's money. So there's some serious dough at stake here. And the results of the push, they've been seriously impressive too. I mean, 209 miles of roller skating in only 18 hours, that is pretty wild. Walton at this point, he's just really astounding the audience too. Like one reporter, he describes his performance as absolutely electrifying the city. And as people are like walking through the doors of the arena, they keep looking at the scoreboard, they see that big 209, and then they look at Walton with like this expression of disbelief, because Walton's out there looking so good and so fresh. Like, how could he possibly have gone 209 miles when he's still looking that well put together? And as we move on up to 9 p.m., Walton only gets more impressive. He's now got 8 miles on Maddox, and he is still looking good. He actually starts like full-on sprinting around the track at one point, telling everybody that he's gonna try and push for 250 miles by midnight. But his trainers have to step in and slow him down because they don't want Walton to wear himself out too bad on the first day. Also at 9 p.m., a polo game starts up on the other side of the arena, as does another fancy skating performance by a Japanese skater this time. So now we've got a high-speed roller skating race on one side of the garden, a hot polo match going on the other, and some skating pageantry to top it all off. Like, it really must have just felt like some sort of carnival in there at this point. Stuff just happening at every single corner of the arena, and the audience just absolutely loving it, because we've got 11,000 people piled in there now. Interestingly though, the promoters have actually sectioned off one side of the track, one side of the railing for women only. So we have one little like section of the track that is just packed deep with ladies all pushing and shoving and jostling and cheering and trying to get a better look at the racers. And hey, we also got some more great descriptions of what the racers are getting up to at this point in the race too. Like, some of the details the reporters mentioned here are just incredible. Like, for example, Johnson, who is sitting back in 13th place, he's developed a very interesting strategy for this race. For whatever reason, he's skating around with a sponge in his mouth and a bottle of ginger ale in his hand. But that's not even the weird part. The weird part is that Johnson's trainer has decided that he needs to be eating a lot in order to keep his endurance up. So every other hour, like clockwork, Johnson comes off the track and shovels down 12 Frankfurt sausages all at once. Like, every 2 hours he's doing this. Every 120 minutes, he has to go sit down and eat 12 sausages. Like, it's such a great strategy that one reporter even sarcastically calls Johnson a genius for it. And hey, well, the other skaters, they're definitely not copying Johnson's sausage strategy. They definitely seem to be on board with the whole ginger ale thing. In fact, most of the racers are out there knocking back bottles and bottles of the stuff. Ike's especially has an affinity for it. He is just draining case after case after case of ginger ale, all while still maintaining that super far leaning back pose too, just going around like... And hey, Irish, the UK champion, he's also got some strange dietary habits. He somehow always has an orange in his hand. As he skates around, he's eating them real quick, scarfing down one every 3 minutes. And the funny part too is that nobody can tell where he's even getting all these oranges from either. Like, nobody ever sees someone hand Irish an orange. He magically just always has another one. And of course, we also got poor old Frank back there, still struggling his way around the track. Some people are even going so far as to attribute Frank's poor performance to some kind of drinking problem, which I think is pretty rude. Leave the guy alone, come on. But hey, let's move up the clock now to 11. We get some very interesting developments. Elks is really starting to slip down the ranks. He actually left the track shortly after 9 p.m. due to some severe hip and knee stiffness, and it is costing him some serious mileage. Also around this time, Donovan and Robinson, they engaged themselves in some kind of like mini race. You know, both of the guys, they start flying around the track trying to shake off the other. And the crowd just loves it. They erupt into applause, and all the other skaters are glancing behind them, trying not to get run down by the two sprinters. Eventually though, Robinson, he wears himself down a little bit too much and he can't keep up with the pace, and he's got to back off, leaving Donovan to bask in the glory of his miniature win. And hey, Small, he's also got something to celebrate. As Small's going around the track, one of the many women on the railing leans over and hands him some roses and a letter that smells of sweet perfume. So, Small pops open that letter, and as he's reading it, a deep red blush washes over his face. One of the reporters asks him what the note says, and Small says, "None of your business," and then skates off with a big goofy smile on his face for the next half hour. Small's not the only one to be getting gifts here either. Like, Purcell is visited by some supporters from his hometown of Newburgh who hand him this big bouquet that he fastens onto his sweater. Shock has somehow gotten his hands on a humongous sombrero, and now he's racing around the track with it pulled down over his eyes, the flaps of the hat whipping around behind him as he's going. And Shock, he's that guy, remember, that crouches like way over when he's skating. He's got his back bent. So I'm sure it must have been pretty funny to see this dude going around the track with a huge hat on, bent over like this. Also important to note is by this time of night, the strain of the race is really starting to set in. Like, everyone is starting to look a bit shaky out there. With the exception of Meyer, the man in the blue suit with the toothpick. Remember him? He's still looking real calm. Pretty much every article I found points him out as the least fatigued man in the whole race. And old Frank Hart, he's still slowly getting better and better at skating too. He's putting along now with a big improvement to his balance. Ford, though, Hart's main competitor for last place, is still just doing horribly. His legs are wobbling, his mouth is twitching, his shoulders are convulsing, and he's constantly losing his balance. He's just not having a good time out there. The big story, though, of course, is Walton's dominance on this first day. He's now sitting 10 miles ahead of Maddox, meaning that $100 bounty for most miles on the first day, pretty much definitely his. As he skates around the track, all the supporters from New York are patting him on the back and saluting him and telling him, "Good boy, Walton." Like, he has really impressed everyone today. Even Maddox now is recognizing that the race for the $100 bonus is pretty much over, so he decides to take it easy for a minute and play to the crowd a bit. He grabs Walton's hand, and together they skate around the track together a few times. The crowd's just going crazy here because it's first and second place circling the track together after almost 24 hours straight of speed skating, so total recipe to get the crowd all worked up. And they even take it a step further and reach over and swap hats with each other too. Eventually though, midnight rolls around and Walton snatches up that $100. The audience starts to thin out. You know, most people got to go home for the night. They got work in the morning. Though there are about 500 people that stay in the garden, electing to spend the night sleeping in the bleachers so that they don't miss even a second of the race. The reporters, they fondly refer to this type of fan as a sleeper. And with that, day one is complete. Only 5 more days to go. But okay, day 2. Let's move the clock on up to 2 a.m. See how we're doing. And hey, looks like there's a lot of movement on this chart. A lot of the racers moving up like maybe a couple spots or going down 1 or 2. And there's a reason for that. It is because this is where what I'm going to call night strategies come into play. Because remember, there is no timeout in this race. You can leave the track whenever you want. You can stay on the track for as long as you want. It is entirely up to you. So one of the most important parts of competing in this race quickly becomes managing how much time you take off the track. And all these races and their coaches, they got different philosophies about the subject. Like some skaters might try to stay on the track and make some extra miles overnight. And then some guys like Frank Hart are just gonna go take 12-hour naps because they know they don't have much of a chance at first place anymore. And by the way, all these skaters, they're actually all going to the same place when they sleep too. The promoter of the race rented out like a house across the street from the garden. So whenever anybody needs a rest, they just hop off the track, cross the street, and boom, there's a bed waiting for them. So why don't we move the time up to 8 a.m. and see how everybody's night strategies worked out. And wow, look at that, huge movement on the leaderboard. Biggest thing that jumps out here is that Walton has plummeted all the way from 1st to 6th, a massive drop. And the reason for this is pretty obvious when you read through the newspaper articles. You see, literally 2 minutes after Walton collected that $100 for having the most miles on day 1, he was off the track and across the street over at the sleeping house, where he then promptly fell asleep for the next 9 hours. Like, look at this chart that the Boston Globe printed here with some of the hourly times for the top contenders. You can see that Walton's mileage did not change at all until about 9 a.m. Boyce also took quite a while off, and he paid for it. He's fallen 3 spots. Maddox and O'Melia, they both slept for maybe 5 hours or so, and Donovan here really pushed himself. He slept for only 3 hours-ish, and now he's sitting up in 2nd place. But out of all the Ironmen who didn't spend much time in bed, one skater is the king, Shock, that guy from Chicago who skates with his back bent way over. Just look at the numbers. Throughout the entire night, Shock's score increased every single hour except 1, meaning this guy slept for like an hour and a half tops, if that. Probably more like 45 minutes or an hour if you factor in the time it takes to pull off your skating gear and go across the street, right? But hey, sleep deprivation actually seems like a winning strategy. At least for now, because Shock is way out in front. 1st place by 4 whole miles. And this guy, he is real serious about this approach too. Like, there's all these great quotes from the reporters throughout the whole night talking about how hard Shock is pushing. Like, here's a really good one talking about how right around 2 a.m.ish, Shock was really skating hard. He looked possessed with determination. And here's a really great quote from the Boston Herald. The reporter here is talking about how much sleep all the skaters have got. You know, he says, Walton got 8 hours of sleep. Small had 5 hours. And then he says, Shock dozed while his rollers carried him towards the top of the blackboard. So while everyone else is asleep in a nice warm bed, Shock is at the rink, sleeping on his skates, putting the work in. And Shock's coach is totally on board with this strategy too. Like, when a reporter asks the coach if he really thinks it's a winning game plan to keep his skater from sleeping, the coach just says, oh, roller skating isn't even real exercise. Like, it's easy. Shock doesn't need any more than like 2 hours of sleep a night. Tops. Trust me. Oh, and by the way, this whole time, Shock is still out there skating with his back like way bent over too. Like, in fact, the longer he stays on the track, the further and further he continues to bend over. Like, one reporter even says that Shock is bent so far over that you can't even see him above the wooden railing anymore. He's just totally obscured. And people even start making jokes about his weird posture. Like, one guy says that Shock should have skates on his hands since they're already basically touching the ground. And all the other skaters are kind of joking around now too. That, you know, whenever Shock stands up straight, they make a big joke out of recoiling with surprise because they're so shocked that this guy actually stood up straight. Oh my God, he actually stood up. I can't believe it. Shock's rise to the top is far from the only story of the early morning hours though. Like, for one, all of the skaters are now going around the track while holding sponges in their mouth. None of the reporters can figure out exactly why, but pretty much all the racers are doing it. They're just flying around the track while chomping on a sponge. And we've also got 2 more dropouts this morning. The first is Chapman, who apparently woke up from a few hours sleep, went to get out of bed, and then realized that he couldn't bend his legs. Yeah, they're just stiff as a board. I guess that's what happens when you roller skate for over 150 miles straight, but regardless, he's out of there. And he's not the only one. Purcell also has to withdraw, and this one is pretty sad, actually. You see, Purcell is doing really well so far. He's sitting up in 11th place. But right around 8 in the morning, he gets a telegram from his hometown. And unfortunately, it appears that his father has been killed in some kind of train accident. So he's got to withdraw and head home too. And this news, apparently it actually hits the other skaters pretty hard, because up until this point, Purcell has been one of the most happiest and upbeat guys on the track. So it's a real shame he's gone. But all right, I think we've been sitting on 8 a.m. for long enough now, so let's scoot on up to 11 a.m. And wow, look at that. Donovan has actually pushed his way up to first place. That is remarkable for an 18-year-old newsboy that had to walk 200 miles just to get here, right? Actually though, Donovan's story it's a lot deeper and a lot more interesting than just the walking thing, because this kid, he's a real fighter, like a real champion of the average Joe. See, a few weeks ago, Donovan and his friends heard about this 6-day roller skating race, so they all got together and decided that they ought to select a representative from their little town of Elmira, New York, that they could send out to the competition. And after a tough deliberation, they eventually selected Donovan as their guy, determining that he is the best skater of their little group. Only one problem though. Donovan is just a newsboy. He doesn't have any money. He doesn't even really have his own equipment. So what the boys do is they all get together to lend him a hand. From one friend, he borrows some skating shoes. From another, he borrows a cap. From another, a satchel for the journey to New York. From another, a handkerchief. And then to top it all off, as Donovan is leaving town, he is stopped by, I swear to God, his rival. Another skater in town that Donovan has fought many a contested race against. And just like a scene straight out of a movie, Donovan's rival puts aside their differences, wishes him luck, and hands him a nice big overcoat to wear for the 200-mile walk. Like this dude has got a real protagonist's story here. Like literally through the power of friendship, he was able to compete in this race. And ever since the race started, he's been turning heads too. Like he went from a nobody to a contender real quick. In fact, he's even got a 6-day race legend backing him up now. See, when Donovan first showed up at this race, he didn't even have a coach. Like he had nobody with him. He's just there totally on his own, which unfortunately led to him getting his extra clothes stolen, since he doesn't have anybody to watch his stuff while he's skating. But don't fret, we got another moment straight out of a sports movie for old Donovan here. See, in attendance of this race are 2 greats of the 6-day contest, champion racer Patrick Fitzgerald and his coach, Happy Jack Smith. Apparently, these 2 guys were so impressed with Donovan on the first day that they just offered to be his coach. And now the kid's got 2 of the best in the industry watching his back. Pretty remarkable story, right? But before the tears start welling up in your eyes too much, let me just bring the chart up to 4 p.m. And uh-oh, Shock's back in first place. Still got quite a lot of skating to do here before we crown anyone a champion. Oh, and by the way, you might have noticed Aukenbrandt here, climbing his way back up the rankings. In case you don't remember, this is the guy that just disappeared out of the blue back on day 1. The guy who just like randomly left the track and never came back. Well, right about now, we finally figure out what happened to him. And this one's a doozy. Ready for this? So yesterday, when Aukenbrandt left the track around 7 a.m.-ish, he was actually just going across the street to that sleeping house so he could rest up a bit. But somehow, on the way over there, He got himself arrested for assault. Like, I couldn't find any newspaper articles with more specific details than that, but somehow he just attacked somebody while he was crossing the street. And now, several hours later, he's made bail and he's back on the track. Like, he's literally been sitting in a jail cell for the last few hours, and when he finally gets out, the first thing he wants to do is get back to circling the rink again like nothing even happened. Just crazy stuff, right? Oh, and just to make it even weirder, the other racers actually play a prank on Auchenbrandt too. Yeah, they pretend that his score is 412 miles, which is way over the mileage of even shock. So Auchenbrandt, he sees that and he freaks out and he's like, oh my God, I can't believe that my score is 412. And everyone's laughing and oh ho ho, we sure got that guy who just got arrested for attacking somebody. Gotcha. All right, what do you say we do a quick little check-in on Meyer? Remember him? He's that guy in the blue suit and the toothpick who skates around super gracefully like he's in some kind of figure skating competition. Well, now he's got himself a line of 12 skaters behind him that are all circling the track in his stead. He's just up there at the front, doesn't even look tired, chomping on his toothpick. He's looking so good that he's even got a nickname now. Everyone is calling him the Prince of the Rink. And he's not doing too bad either, because if we move up the clock to 10 p.m., we can see that Meyer's actually broken into the top 10. That is pretty impressive. A few other important things happened over the last couple hours too. One of the most explosive being a huge screaming match that broke out between Hickey and his trainers. Because apparently Hickey's whole entourage thought that he wasn't trying hard enough, that he's just lazing around the rink, that he's putting zero effort into his skating. Obviously Hickey disagrees, and this whole argument just kept escalating and escalating until Hickey's sponsor eventually just reaches over and takes away his skates. Another very strange little occurrence happens around 7 p.m. when Small's coach walks up to the judge's scoring table and hands him a note. The judges unfurl it, and it's this huge, long, formal complaint that Small's team is submitting against Maddox and Walton, two of the best skaters in the race. Apparently, Small's guys are trying to say that around 6:40 yesterday morning, Walton and Maddox both intentionally teamed up to body check Small into the railing. Yeah, the letter's trying to say that they bashed Small's face into the railing and busted his shoulder up, and I guess that's their excuse for why Small isn't winning the race right now. But the judges aren't buying it. They look at the letter and they're like, all right, you probably should have brought this up 30 hours ago when it supposedly happened. Also, nobody knows what you're talking about, so no, we're not gonna do anything about this. Get back on the track. You also might have noticed that some of our skaters have now broken 400 miles. Schock passed that milestone first at right around 8:30. Apparently when he sailed around for that last lap, the cheers were just absolutely deafening. By the way, another thing to note, Donovan, second place, is taking breaks right around now. Well, Schock is not. He just keeps on pushing. We got some interesting stuff going along with the other racers too. Elks at this point is pretty much shot. His knees and hips are real busted up and nobody's expecting him to make it much further. Meyer, on the other hand, is out there looking great. Our friend in the blue suit is the freshest man on the track. There's even some rumblings going around the arena that Meyer is certain to crawl his way up to first. Got a few more dropouts this evening too. Mount, Gormley, and Hickey all call it quits for the week. Hickey probably against his own will, because remember, he's the guy who got his skates stolen by his own coach. Oh, and one more dropout too. I'm afraid it's time to say goodbye to dear old Frank Hart. Yeah, sometime during the evening of the second day, he just decides that he's had enough learning on the fly. Good luck out there, Frank. We'll miss you. But hey, that's 2 days down. We're a third of the way through. So let's move right on along to 2 a.m. on day 3. And let me tell you, things are starting to get just a little bit shisty down here on the roller rink. For one, we finally get an answer to the question of why the skaters are all going around with sponges in their mouth. It's because all the roller skating around on that horrible plywood barn door rink has kicked up so much sawdust into the air that the racers are literally choking on it as they circle the track. So the sponge is just sort of like a makeshift mask or like a filter that they're using to keep from coughing nonstop. And in fact, the condition on the track in general is just pretty pitiful at this point in the race. Like even beyond just the sawdust thing, there's like these huge black rough spots all over the rink where oil from the racer's skates is soaked into the wood, and there's these big holes gouged out in the track where splinters have accidentally been torn from the planks. Like this track was just not built to support 30 guys putting hundreds of miles each on it. But unfortunately, the track isn't the only thing that's starting to get worn down here. Our racers are really starting to feel the effects of their labors too. One of them in particular, a whole lot more than the others. Shock, our first place racer. You see, Shock is not going to take this second night any easier than he did the first. While most of the other skaters are, again, taking some time off for the evening, Shock just keeps on pushing. Even Donovan, his closest competitor, had some time off during the day, but not Shock. At this point, he's pushing over 48 hours of roller skating time without any more than like an hour's break to sleep, tops. And it is wearing on him. His eyes now are sunken deep into his skull from sleep deprivation. His face is brightly flushed red, and worst of all, that hunched over skating position of his has just deepened even further. He's basically now circling the track with his back like parallel to the ground. But don't worry too much about old Shock. It actually seems like he's just about now gonna get his first significant rest of the event. Yeah, right around 3 in the morning, Shock's trainer permits him to leave the track and go get some sleep for the first time in over 2 days. And so there he goes, off to the house. After hours and hours and hours and hours of work, Shock is finally getting some much needed rest. For about 48 minutes. Poor Shock, man. Yeah, pretty much like the second that Shock leaves the track, Donovan just really turns on the jets and he starts gaining real hard on Shock. So Shock's coaches start to freak out and they're afraid that Shock is going to lose his lead. So their solution to the problem is to just run across the street to the sleeping house and literally drag Shock out of his bed and back out into the cold, chill, foggy air of the morning. And so there he is, back on the track, looking like a zombie. But hey, even that short rest has allowed Donovan to catch up. Because if we just move the clock up a bit, we'll see that Shock's 20-mile lead at 2 a.m. has been cut to just 10 by 6 a.m. Bang. But let's take a quick break from the Shock and Donovan show real quick to take a look around the rest of the rink. Meyer, for example, is still doing very well for himself. He's climbed all the way up to spot number 7 now. Although the fact that he just kind of takes it nice and steady around the track is starting to catch up to him. A pretty large gap is forming between him and the top 5. In fact, the top 5 skaters in general are really starting to pull away from the rest of the pack. There's now 34 miles between 5th and 6th, which equates to several hours worth of skating. Oh, and by the way, you might have noticed that Walton is our 6th place skater here. He is still nowhere near as dominant as he was on that first day. Mostly because, once again, he just goes to bed for pretty much the whole night, allowing all the other skaters to put some mileage on him. For whatever reason, it just seems like Walton isn't all that interested in pushing himself anymore. But as the morning moves on and we pass up to 10 a.m., that race for first place just gets harder and harder to ignore. There is only 4 miles between Shock and Donovan now. Like, how scary has that got to be for Shock? He's been out there killing himself for what, like 58 hours now, sleeping less than anyone, working harder than anyone, and still he's getting crept up on? Dang. But hey, at least he and Donovan are keeping it friendly. Right after Shock rounds the track for his 500th mile, Donovan skates over next to him and gives him a real hearty pat on the back. And then, 25 minutes later, Donovan passes 500 too. And here comes Shock to return the favor and congratulate him on his efforts. But make no mistake, despite the sportsmanship, things are getting serious out there on the track right about now. As the sun rises high in the sky, shining in through the windows, one reporter notes a sense of oppressiveness present in the air. Donovan now is absolutely dogging Shock for first. Like, this kid is out there fighting for all his friends back home who lended him his equipment. Every line in his face is hardened with determination and self-will. But as we move on up to 12 o'clock, Shock is still clinging to that lead with a vice grip. This time though, mostly due to just straight up pure luck. See, Donovan actually breaks his skate right around 10 o'clock and he ends up needing Phillips to push him over to the coaching area. So Donovan loses about 20 minutes of skating time for the repair job. But as soon as he's back on the track, he is going. He throws off his coat and he takes off after Shock. Shock tries his best to keep up, but at this point he is just exhausted. Little by little, Donovan is cutting the tree down. He is steadily gaining. Shock is pumping his legs as best he can, but he just has to watch in horror as Donovan slowly but surely passes him lap after lap after lap, cutting that lead down 1/8 of a mile at a time. And you know, reporters at this point in the race are now starting to refer to Shock as a hunchback. His bent over posture just keeps getting more and more prominent. Like, he is stiff, he is tired, sleep deprivation is really starting to catch up with him, and all of it is being reflected in the score. By 12:30, Donovan has cut the lead to just 1 mile. And then it happens. At 12:45, Donovan sails right by Shock. And the place absolutely erupts. People are yelling and shouting and waving handkerchiefs in the air like Donovan is looking and skating great now. And Shock just isn't. The general sentiment around the arena is that Shock has nothing left in the tank to catch up to Donovan. And at least for now, they're right. By 2 p.m., Donovan already has a 3-mile lead on old Shock. In fact, Shock seems like he's just kind of accepted that he doesn't have much of a chance of catching Donovan. He's now just slowly skating around the track, and every time he passes by his coach, they reach over and hand him a little tin pot full of water that he's sucking down as he circles the rink. Donovan's actually kind of doing something similar though. He's on the other side of the track knocking back bottle after bottle of ginger ale. But hey, seems like the race for first has stabilized a bit, so why don't we move on up to about 6 p.m. and I'll fill you in on what the other skaters have been getting up to. For one, we actually got another crash today. Yeah, it's that 16-year-old kid from Ireland, Amelia. Apparently another contestant actually tripped him up and he ended up crashing down right in front of the scorer's table. His elbow gets all cut up and he's feeling pretty shaken, but he's all right. He'll be back on the rink in no time. Meyer is still looking good. There's actually a lot of gambling going around in the arena at the moment, and Meyer is one of the favorites. Mostly because he still appears to be very well put together out there. He's got that nice blue suit on, and according to reporters, he pretty much just looks exactly the same as he did on the first day. Like, not a single one of his 420 miles is visible on his face. Just moving along, calm and steady. Every once in a while, another skater will come up next to him and try to engage in like some kind of little sprint, like, come on, let's do a little mini race, and Meyer will just look at him and keep on keeping on at his own pace. But despite Meyer's lackadaisical approach, somehow there are like all these rumors flying around the arena about how Meyer is just gonna like explode with energy like any second. Like everybody's talking and saying that he's gonna make some mad push and do 1,000 miles by the end of the race, and all this gossip is even getting down to the other contestants, and they're like starting to look at Meyer out of the corner of their eyes. They're worried that like at any moment now he's gonna start some huge sprint and just blow everybody away. And as Meyer's passing the track, spectators are literally like leaning over the railing and winking at him like, we know what you're about to do. We got you. We got money on you. We know you're about to push hard here. But despite the talk and gossip, Meyer himself apparently has no idea why he's getting all this attention. He's just skating around doing his own thing anyway, while all these people are just buzzing up there about how he's gonna kill everybody any moment. Honestly though, if you ask me, the reason the Meyer looks so fresh is probably just because he's taken 4-hour dinner breaks. That'll keep anybody fresh. Anyway though, let's move on up a bit to 10 p.m. Now that we're getting deeper into the race, there's not nearly as much movement on the leaderboard anymore, but still, there is interesting stuff happening out there on the rink. Like Maddox has just passed Boyce. This one has been a real long time coming. Maddox has been pushing hard for over 15 hours without a rest now, and just finally he got his opportunity after Boyce went off the track for a little bit. We also get just a little bit of insight into why Walton seems to have completely given up on pushing himself for this race. Right around 8 p.m., Walton just completely out of the blue turns on the jets hardcore and just blasts around the track for a full mile, crushing everybody who tries to match his speed. And then, after he beats everybody, he just slows right back down like nothing happened. And Walton's trainer is watching this whole thing, right? And he just shakes his head and tells the reporters that Walton could easily be in first place if he really wanted to be. He's just being lazy. Apparently smoking everybody on that first day and collecting that $100 was enough for Walton. One reporter even goes to do an interview with him and he asks, "Hey, do you think there's a chance you're gonna make it back up to first place?" And Walton just looks at him, smiles, shakes his head. Who knows? Donovan, by the way, has absolutely blown open the gap between him and Schock. He's got him by 16 miles now, mostly because Schock is just destroyed at this point. Like a Boston Globe reporter talks to Schock's trainers and he learns that Schock's liver is like really giving him issues right now. And even worse, all that leaning way over is finally catching up to him. He's feeling so stiff now that whenever he goes to straighten up his body, like pain shoots through his face, like grimaces. Donovan, on the other hand, is just killing it. He's going around the track like mad, according to the newspapers. At around 9:55, he passes the 600-mile marker and a huge chorus of cheers echoes through the arena. Because Donovan has actually gained quite the following over the course of this race, mostly from a demographic that you might not expect. See, a whole lot of New York's street boys, as referred to by the newspapers, have heard about this kid, this like newsboy who's out there crushing all these professionals. And now they're flocking into the garden in throngs to see it happen. To them, Donovan is a hero. He is one of them. He is another young, impoverished kid who's now out there sticking it to the man. He is their representative. Okay, so now I'm gonna tell you a story here that I almost cut from the video because I don't think it's true, but it's just too wild to not mention. So this is a real weird one. Let me just try and explain it. So one reporter says that right around the same time that Donovan peeled off that 600th mile, an Irish guy named Powers walked into the arena. And Powers, he takes one look at Donovan and just explodes with excitement. He gets all amped up and he runs over to the flower stand to buy Donovan a bouquet and he starts showering the kid with praise and he's telling him how great he is. And it turns out that Powers is doing all this because for some reason he thinks that Donovan is the son of a famous Irish Republican leader who had recently been in the news for some bombing attacks on English cities. And so Powers runs off to go talk to some other Irish guys, and they all get together in a little huddle and start discussing in detail how they're gonna send bombs over to England that are hidden in roller skates. And I don't know, like, this one just really seems to me like it's just a reporter who doesn't like Irish people making up a crazy story. Like, how does he know that Irish guy's name? Like, did he go up to him and be like, "Hey, we want to quote you in the newspaper as trying to send mail bombs to England. What's your name?" And then also, like, is he, are these Irish guys, like, all in a big huddle, like, talking, planning their secret bombing, and then the reporter is just right there over their shoulders, like, writing everything down, and no one's noticing? Like, I don't know, there's just a weird one. You can believe it if you want, but it just seems a little far-fetched to me. Anyway, though, why don't we get back to some stuff that definitely did really happen. And we'll start by moving on up to 2 a.m. on day 4. Now, the big thing to notice here is that Maddox has once again fallen back behind Boyce. And the reason for that is pretty crazy. You see, right around 10:15, Maddox, he's skating around by the scorer's table at a pretty good pace when he just, out of the blue, pitches over and flops down on the ground in a heap. Just totally collapses. So, of course, his trainers, they rush over to him, and what do you know? The poor guy's just passed out cold. The exhaustion of skating for hours and hours on end is finally catching up to him. Now, it is important to note that this is not like the falls from earlier that were just caused by some kind of like collision or whatever. This is a legit medical issue. It takes doctors 10 minutes to bring Maddox back to consciousness. 10 minutes of being completely unresponsive. That is a crazy long time. So, what do the coaches do when they finally get him back awake? They send him back out on the track, of course. Yeah, less than 2 hours after Maddox was fully unconscious for 10 minutes. They're just like, get back out there, back on the track, come on, you're fine. Obviously though, he's not fine. He goes around for like 2 laps and then he has to come off again, presumably because he's about to lose consciousness again. So now Maddox's coaches, they got a problem, right? These are crucial hours of a hot race for that 3rd place spot, and their skater is just totally spent. He can't even stay on his feet. He's just passing out every time they send him out on the track. So they need a solution, right? Some way to get their guy out there without him fainting. And here's what they come up with. They just send Maddox back out there on the track with a sponge soaked with ammonia. He's just skating around with one hand holding an ammonia sponge. So that way, whenever he's about to pass out, he can just take a big whiff and pop himself back to consciousness. Like, just insane, right? Like, literally inhaling ammonia so you can keep roller skating for your 72nd hour and counting. On the lighter side of things, we got Ward, who's now out there wearing a sweater that everyone says makes him look like a caterpillar. That's pretty cool. And how about a quick Elks update? That poor guy is really starting to go downhill. His trainers tell the reporters that his knees are shot and that every time he moves his hips, he feels like a stab of pain, like someone's gouging him with a red hot poker. But he's not the only one in pain. Shock is somehow only getting worse. He's stiff, his face is like contorted, he's slurping water out of that tin can of his, he doesn't look right. At this point, it is clear to the reporters that Donovan is in way better shape. Probably because Donovan is actually taking breaks. Like whenever he hits the track after a little rest, the articles are always like very specific to say that this kid is looking fresh and healthy again. And in fact, like just in general, Donovan's trainers seem like they're really taking care of him. The reporters are always talking about how precisely and gently he's being handled. So I guess it pays to have 2 6-day race veterans backing you up, huh? Some people, they just don't have that luxury though. And as we move on up to 5 a.m., we get a few more dropouts. Ikes is the first to go down, probably because he's just in real rough shape. And so does Irish, the United Kingdom champion. I guess his ankles are like super messed up and it's keeping him from racing. And then if we move on up again to 10 a.m., we get another dropout, Welch. And the reason Welch is dropping out is apparently because he's lazy, according to the reporters. But I don't know, you're not gonna hear me calling anyone who roller skates for 329 miles lazy. But regardless, that's another skater down. Still got plenty of guys on the track though, like Walt, who's out there chugging along. He had himself another long night's sleep, 7 hours. Still not concerned at all with taking that top spot. Meyer, the prince of the track, he's looking great in his suit as usual. Again, the reporters say that he looks fresher than anyone. But who doesn't look fresh is Shock. Back to Shock again. I know we're spending a lot of time talking about how rough this guy looks, but like holy cow, this dude is in just deplorable condition. Like right about now, he is trying his best to chase down Donovan, but pretty much everyone in the arena knows that that's not gonna happen. Well, Donovan is out there skating with vigor. Shock can only wobble on after him. And of course, he's still bent way over, arms swinging back and forth like the trunk of an elephant. And it's not just the eye test that has Shock in a bad way either. Right around like 10-ish, Shock gives a pretty startling interview to a New York Sun reporter. Shock admits that the arena doctors have been pleading with him to get off the track. Like they're telling him that he's killing himself, that his kidneys are literally about to fail and he's gonna die if he keeps this up. But he doesn't care. He just says, well, if I can't get first, then I'm for sure gonna hold on tight to second. And honestly, at this point in the race, it seems like he's actually got a good shot at doing just that. Boyce, the 3rd place skater, is over 50 miles behind Shock. pretty massive discrepancy to overcome, especially when the race is already like half over, right? Although I should mention, some reporters are not quite convinced that Schock is going to hold that top spot. Like this guy in particular from the Boston Globe seems to think that Schock's 50-mile lead is liable to evaporate like snow under the noonday sun. After all, Boyce is like really moving along at a good pace now, while Schock he's struggling. Plus, once again, Schock has not slept a wink overnight, whereas Boyce took a nice 3-hour snooze to rest and recuperate. But we'll just have to keep an eye on that as it develops. For now, let's move on up to 12 p.m. And it is right around here that the racers come up against a scandal. And a pretty big one too. It has to do with the prize money that these guys are all fighting for. You see, this race only pays out prize money to the top 4 racers. Nobody past 4th wins anything. Which obviously begs the question, what are all those guys down at the bottom still doing in the race? You know, somebody like Ford or Mason has absolutely no shot whatsoever of earning a top 4 slot. So like, why are they still putting themselves through this? Well, it is because the rules of the race actually stipulate one more cash incentive. If a skater can manage to complete the race and spend at least 12 hours of each day on the track, they'll earn $50 as a reward. So it doesn't matter what place they get out there every day and stay in the race and put in a good amount of time on the track, they get $50. Plus all their room and like travel expenses paid, which is a good deal. Like $50 would be about $1,500 today with inflation. So that's sort of just like their minimum wage for the race. So a lot of these guys at the end of the pack there are just kind of treating this contest like a job now. They just clock in for their 12 hours each day and then bounce for a good night's sleep once the sun goes down. Which seems like a pretty fair system because that way the track stays relatively full and you don't end up with only like 6 guys out there skating by like day 5, right? But according to the promoter, it's not a fair deal. At least not anymore. Halfway through day 4, he just goes, oh, no more $50 incentive. We're done with that. You're not getting jacked from me anymore. Get off my track. Go home. Get out of my face. Screw you. So of course, all the racers at the bottom of the pack are not taken too kindly to this. They start protesting and arguing, but it's not like they can do much about it. And so, in one fell swoop, we lose Ford, Aukenbrandt, Egan, Cohen, and Mason all over the next few hours. One by one, they're just gonna trickle out by the end of the day. They might log like a couple more miles for the next few hours or so, but make no mistake, their race is over. By the end of the night, they're all storming out, promising to bring a lawsuit against the event promoter. And I hope they do, because that's a real screw job. Back to the race itself though. Donovan just hit 700 miles. That's pretty insane, right? Especially when you stop to think about it in terms of like laps too. Because remember, this is only like an 1/8 of a mile track. Donovan has now circled the same rink 5,600 times in less than 4 days. Can you even imagine circling the same exact track 5,000 times in 4 days? It's just unbelievable. And let me tell you, after all that many laps, this race has just become a war of endurance and attrition at this point. Like the skaters, they're not going for little sprints and spurts like they used to. It's really now just about staying the course and keeping up a good pace for as long as you can. And one dude who is really good in that department is O'Melia, that 15-year-old kid from Ireland. Outside of Donovan, O'Melia is looking better than any of the other skaters. And hey, he's even taken a page out of Meyer's book. He's got a toothpick in his mouth now as he circles the track. That's kind of like fun, isn't it? Like O'Melia is this young, impressionable teenager. And so he's copying the style of the cool, suave prince of the track. On the other side of the coin from O'Melia though is Maddox, who is really not looking too hot. Which makes sense considering that he needs an ammonia sponge to keep from passing out. Maddox's coach though, for like whatever reason, is just kind of being a huge jerk about the situation. Like he's literally going around telling everybody that Maddox is being super lazy. Like he's actually trying to say that Maddox is making up reasons to leave the track. He's like, oh yeah, Maddox, that dude is so lazy. He always has an excuse to take a break. Oh, my stomach hurts. Oh, there's dust in my eye. Oh, my knee hurts. And it's just like, dude, your guy was literally out cold for 20 minutes a few hours, or 10 minutes a few hours ago. Like, cut him some slack. Maddox ain't the only one with a suspect coach, though. Because we also got Shock out there, who's really not getting the kind of support he needs. His coach is just still absolutely working him to the bone. At this point in the race, Shock literally cannot even straighten his back out enough to eat food. Whenever his trainer hands him something to eat, he just has to like try and take a bite while still bent way over. Like people at this point are literally expecting Shock to drop out at any minute. He just looks completely debilitated. And what is his coach doing while Shock is out there killing himself? Well, he's walking around with a picture of Shock on a bicycle, showing it to everybody and trying to claim that because Shock leans over when he rides a bicycle, he just likes to lean over when he does any race. Like, yeah, according to the coach, debilitating back injuries are just how Shock likes it. Like, he bends way over in bike races, so therefore it's totally normal for him to bend over during any race. Like, don't blame the coach for working the skater too hard. Like, this is just what Shock does. He always breaks his own back. But then, just when you thought the guy couldn't get any scummier, Shock's trainer starts going around telling everybody that earlier in the day, he overheard Donovan crying like a little baby trying to quit the race. Donovan's trainer, of course, like shuts that down right away as nonsense. But still, this stuff is just nuts. Like, how much of a stereotype can you be? Like riding your own skater to exhaustion and then spreading rumors that the other skaters are crybaby losers? And then meanwhile, his guy, Shock, is out there with a 2x4 strapped to his back, trying to straighten out before he cripples himself. Anyway though, why don't we move the clock up a bit to 2 p.m. And boy, is it cold. Over the course of the day, the temperature in the building has just plummeted. It is a frosty March afternoon. Everybody's got coats on. The skaters' hands are turning blue. Just one more obstacle for these guys to overcome. But despite the cold, we still got some skaters out there who are looking good. Like Walton, who is still perplexing reporters. He's not in pain, he's healthy. People keep saying he could crush anyone else on the rink anytime he wanted to, and yet he's still just taking it easy. Some reporters have even started calling him the champion lazy man. And as we move on up to 6 p.m., he just keeps slipping on down the chart. By the way, just look at Donovan's number here. 742. 15 miles ahead of second place. Donovan is opening up like a canyon of a gap here. Like, and he's not even doing it while Shock is taking a break either. Mostly because Shock never takes breaks. But still, Donovan is literally out there passing Shock repeatedly, lapping him again and again and again without Shock being able to do anything about it. And in fact, it is Donovan that's taking time off during this stretch. Like, he's just now coming back from a 2-hour nap, and still Shock couldn't catch him in that time. But that's totally fine, because remember, Shock is okay with second place now. He is resigned to it. He is skating purely to be that first runner-up. And you know what? He's still got a 54-mile lead on Boyce too. Like, that's a pretty massive cushion. And I'm sure if we move the clock up a bit, that's not gonna change. Like 54 miles, how are you gonna cut that down? So why don't we just go ahead and head on up to 10 p.m. And that 54-mile lead has already been cut by 20 in just 4 hours. And by the way, I feel like this is as good a place as any to mention that Shock is not even a professional skater like a lot of these other guys, like not even close. He's literally only been roller skating for 4 months, and this is straight up his first ever roller skating race, like in his life. He literally decided to enter a 6-day straight event for his first ever skating race. So Shock's actual skating skill and like experience is well beneath the others. He's trying to win this race with nothing but will and determination. And also pain ointment. He's got like so much on now that you can smell him before you even see him. And wooden boards too. He's got an even bigger one strapped to his back now. But all right, I think we need another Shock break. Walsh is now wearing a very smart brand new pink suit. And somebody just gave Maddox a roller skate with flowers all over it. Ooh, and Aukenbrandt, one of the guys that got gypped out of that $50 guarantee, he's walking around the arena now trying to get other skaters to join his lawsuit against the promoters. And it's actually working too, because by the end of the race, Aukenbrandt, He's literally going to have 15 out of the 33 racers in his lawsuit with him. Some of the skaters have even started referring to themselves as the $50 man. We also get a pretty intense crash here. Walton and Small get into like a short little sprinting match together, and it ends with Small tripping, crashing into the ground, and then sliding along the track like a bar of soap for 10 feet before he bangs up against the railing. Somehow he's all right. He gets back up, and he's only got a busted up hand to show for his efforts. Near the top of the pack, we got some interesting stuff going on too. Like O'Melia, he's got the intention now of making a real run. He leaves the track for a little bit, and while he's gone, his friends are going around telling everybody that O'Melia's about to come back and embark on like a 15-hour straight marathon push for a top placing. So when the 15-year-old does come back on the track, he's greeted to like this big chorus of cheers, like everyone is ready to see the effort. And O'Melia's got more than the crowd on his side too here, by the way. He gets a letter in the mail from his friends back home, and he opens it up, and they're basically just telling him to go out there and kick some butt. So O'Melia reads through the letter, he smiles, and he says, "I'll do my best to win." And you know, nobody can do any more. And it's not just O'Melia that's gonna give it a real go in the evening hours either. According to reporters, pretty much all the top performers are like hitting the gas right about now. Mostly because Shock just looks incredibly vulnerable. Like everybody's smelling blood in the water. O'Melia, Maddox, Boyce, they are all skating with the intention to chase down Shock specifically. Like Shock is in trouble. And so what are Shock's coaches doing in response? Are they gonna give him a rest finally? No. They're just gonna start shoving a bajillion different weird tonics and medicines down his throat. Contrast that with Donovan's trainers, by the way, who are now telling Donovan to slow up and take it easy and rest up for these last couple days. You know, they got him out there circling the rink now, real slow, chewing on a piece of ice. And so, in line with Donovan's new healthy rest schedule, he is not one of the few racers left on the track at midnight as day 5 rolls around. It's just Ward, Johnson, Shock, who has ditched the 2x4 for some back braces, and O'Melia, who says he's about to push real hard for 4th place. And since Maddox is off the track, it's the perfect opportunity for O'Melia to go. And he goes, peeling off mile after mile after mile, getting closer and closer and closer until 2 a.m. rolls around, and he's done it. O'Melia is now the proud owner of that 4th place spot. But Maddox, he's not just gonna let it go without a fight. Someone comes and tells him in the sleeping house across the street that O'Melia just passed him. And so Maddox, he jumps out of bed, he runs back to the track, and he's got this gigantic overcoat on. He doesn't even bother taking it off, and he just races back out there. And now they're both on the rink, battling it out, racing hard, really pushing. And then something kind of magical happens. 2 things, actually. On one side of the court, Maddox faints yet again. But this time, he doesn't just fall on the track. No. Somehow, he like flips over the railing, I guess, and smashes on top of a bar table and like shatters all these glasses into a million pieces. And then on the other side of the rink, at literally the exact same moment, O'Melia runs over a cigar that somebody flipped onto the track and just face plants into the wood and busts his nose open. It's just like a crazy mental picture, right? Like we got 2 guys racing super hard, and then blam, one of them launches over the railing and belly flops onto a table at the exact same time that the other guy like trips and mashes his nose into the flooring. And the results of the crash end up having some pretty severe impacts on the placings too, because Maddox is okay, he just keeps on skating, but O'Melia, pretty quick after the fall, leaves the track to go take a rest, and by 6 a.m., Maddox has got 4th place all locked up again by 20 miles this time too. Like, poor O'Melia, man. Like, it was right there. It was right there for him. Like, how much more work can a 15-year-old kid put up against a bona fide, meta-learning skating champ like Maddox? Apparently a lot, because right after his break, O'Melia is back out there, casting his coat aside and taking off like a cannon shot. And he's got a chance to catch up too, because Maddox is passing out yet again. This time when it happens, it looks as if he were struck by a sandbag. He just throws his arms up in the air and collapses to the track. And so Amelia is able to take advantage of the newest fainting debacle, and by 10 a.m., he's cut the lead back to 12. Well, by the way, shock, yet another sleepless night. Like, oh my God, I cannot even imagine how exhausted this dude must feel at this point. Like, this is night 4 of little to no sleep and mile 821 of straight roller skating. Just nuts. But you know what? He's got a 30-mile lead again on Boyce, so maybe the struggle is going to pay off after all. But then again, we move on up to 11 a.m. and already Shock's 30-mile lead is back down to 21. And then, if we keep on going to 1 p.m., the lead is cut again to 15 miles. Jeez. Another important thing to note here is the huge gap between 5th and 6th place. As one reporter puts it, Meyer is as far away from Amelia as Philadelphia is from New York. And it really, that kind of geographical reference, like, really puts into perspective how crazy these distances are, doesn't it? I mean, Walton sitting up at a colossal 880 miles, he has basically roller skated the entire length of the island of Cuba at this point. Just crazy. Around the same time, we also get one of my favorite little details of this whole event. It's just kind of like a sweet little reminder that Amelia really is just a kid. You see, a reporter from the Boston Globe, he goes and gets a quick interview with Amelia's trainer, and he asks the coach, like, hey, how's Amelia doing? What's the skater's like physical condition like? And the coach says, Amelia, he's doing totally awesome. He's totally healthy. Don't worry about him. I do have to say, though, this morning, he did get a little homesick. You know, he's never been away from home before, and he's kind of getting the blues about it. So sometimes when he's out on the track, we can see he'll just get a little sad and he'll lose his focus, but that's okay. We just hang on the railing, and when he goes by, we just shout some encouragement to him as he comes around the bend. Like, isn't that great? Like, it's just good to get a little reminder every now and then that we're talking about real people here who like really lived and really felt real feelings during this whole event. Speaking of feelings, Walton is definitely feeling like he doesn't care about racing, as usual. Now he's out there with magazines and newspapers, like literally reading, catching up on the latest news as he goes around the track. Ooh, and we also get a very cool Frank Hart update here. Remember him, the champion 6-day walker who entered the race despite not knowing how to skate? Well, he's back on the track. And no, he has not re-entered the race or like anything like that. He's just training. Yeah, he's just out there to try and learn how to skate so he can be ready for the next race. He's a real competitor, this guy. We also get a very odd description of Walsh here. I guess he must be like super tired because one New York Sun reporter says that he has a send for the coroner look. And a pretty interesting development is going on outside the track too. As the trainers and coaches are like worrying about their guys getting sick, they've actually pulled together like a makeshift hospital just outside the rink. You know, they've spread some quilts over benches to make hospital beds, and they've stolen a few bar tables to use as like cabinets to hold all their tonics and ointments and bandages and whatever. And they've even got like a sizable audience forming around the hospital now, so all these people can just like watch the trainers go to work on their wounded and weary men. Anyway, though, why don't we turn the clock forward a little bit more to 2 p.m. and 11-mile gap between 2nd and 3rd. Shock has got Boyce breathing down his neck here. Like, that 50-mile gap has evaporated, and it is easy to see why this is happening too. Shock has just fallen to pieces. Reporters are pointing him out now as clearly the skater in the worst condition. One journalist from Maine even goes so far as to call him the picture of woe. Like, there's even a sentiment rumbling through the arena that the event promoter should just step in and force Shock to retire for his own safety. Like, the spectators are literally pointing at him and asking, why is that clearly sick man still allowed out on the rink? And by 5 o'clock, he's skating slower than a walk. Boyce has moved within 10 miles of his position. Shock has been killing himself out there, and now he can do almost nothing as Boyce draws closer and closer and closer. He is bent way over. His feet are like so swollen that he has to skate around with unbuttoned shoes. He's wearing these huge like shoulder braces. He looks horrible, and yet he is still out there trying as hard as he is physically capable. And yet, another hour passes. 6 o'clock. Boyce is only 4 miles away. You know, earlier in the day, a Boston Globe reporter actually overheard a conversation between Shock and a spectator. And in that conversation, Shock told the man that his back is just absolutely ruined. Shock knows that first place is way out of his reach. The opportunity is lost. But the spectator, though, still tries to be encouraging. He's basically just like, hey, maybe you can't get first, but that's okay. Second place is still good, right? You can hold on to second place, right? And Shock, who at this point has worked harder than anyone, slept less than anyone, endured more pain than anyone, given absolutely every ounce of his heart and soul into this race, he looks back at the man with tears welling up in his eyes, and he says, "No, I'm afraid not." And at 6:27, Boyce just passes Shock. Thousands of people scream in delight, and Shock just leaves the track. The second he lays down on a bench, he falls asleep, and everyone now is expecting Shock to just withdraw from the race. But he doesn't. In fact, he comes back on the track a couple hours later, just in time to watch Maddox pull up next to him by 10 p.m. And then third place slips away too, just like that. So does fourth. Amelia gets him too. Right after he passes Shock, someone hangs a floral horseshoe over Amelia's neck, and then they hand him a flower basket in each hand. And Amelia just skates around the ring like that, adorned in flowers, basking in the cheers and admiration of the crowd. Amelia is literally hailed as a conquering hero, which makes old Shock the conquered. He's out of the prize money now. And sadly, this is kind of the end of Shock's story. He virtually has no chance of catching back up to the top 4 racers. Now don't worry, he's not going to drop out of the race or anything like that. We're still going to hear from Shock every once in a while. It's just that his time as a competitive racer in this contest is pretty much over. But he's still going to finish the race. Through sheer will, he is going to finish this race, and we're going to be proud of him for it too. But hey, there's no need to be all sad and mopey for the whole rest of the video or anything like that. There's still plenty of exciting and fun things happening on the track. Hey, look at that. The band just started up again. The fancy dress carnival has begun. 10,000 people have packed into the garden. Fancy skaters are out on a separate stage again, spinning and dancing for the crowd. We got unicyclists. We got performers dressed up in all sorts of elaborate costumes. There's celebrities and historic characters, plenty of clowns. Reporters are calling this event even more exciting than the circus. And the racers are absolutely invigorated by the excitement. Even Shock manages to straighten up just enough to peer over the railing at the band and flash a mournful smile. Curiously though, during this whole carnival of costumes and silly outfits, Walton has just disappeared. Everyone is looking for him. Even his coaches have no idea where the guy went. Until, finally, someone takes a real long look at the costume dancers. Hey, is that Walton? Yeah, it's Walton. There he is. Walton is he's put on a sharp checkered black and red suit, and now he's doing spins and acrobatics with the costume dancers. His trainers run up to him and ask him what the heck he's doing, and he just shrugs and says he's taking a rest. So the coaches just let him have his fun. From a commanding first place on day 1 to joining a dance troupe on day 6. You're just a funny guy, Walton. Another important thing to note on the scoreboard here is the incredible lead that Donovan now has over second place. 53 miles, unbelievable. Pretty much everybody knows at this point that Donovan almost definitely has this thing locked up. We're on the last day here and his lead is massive. So his trainers, who have continually taken good care of him so far in this race, tell him to just ease up. Don't wear yourself down, just stay the course, don't push too hard, save your body, which makes perfect sense, right? Like, Donovan is so far ahead, nobody has any chance of catching him. Well, strangely, Donovan himself doesn't seem to share that kind of confidence. In fact, late in the evening on day 5, Donovan out of the blue just starts flying around the track at an unbelievable pace. His trainers try to slow him down, but for some reason, Donovan is just convinced that Maddox and Boyce and Amelia are all right behind him. Like they're right on his heels about to pass him. Like it seems as if like a fit of delusion has struck Donovan. Like the strain of the race has apparently finally caught up to him. In his mind, he has to skate as hard as he can. So he is roaring around the track now. His trainers trying to convince him to slow down are actually running around the track holding the scoreboard in their hands, like tapping at it frantically, trying to get Donovan to notice that he's up by over 50 miles. But the kid, he doesn't seem to believe it. He just keeps on banging out high-speed lap after lap after lap. And by the way, I am sure that while Donovan is doing this, the crowd must be absolutely electric, because Donovan, by this point, has become the audience's favorite racer. Remember earlier when I was talking about that like small contingent of like young, impoverished street boys who came to see Donovan as a hero? Well, that particular group has become a force in the arena. There are now 300 or 400 dirty face hoodlums surrounding the entire length of the track, all packed in to watch Donovan skate. Ooh, I almost forgot. How the kids actually got into the arena is pretty crazy too. Apparently what these boys did was dig a hole under the wall of the building to gain access to a secret tunnel under the garden that P.T. Barnum used to use for his circus. Like pretty wild, right? So there's like hundreds of 10-year-old boys streaming through this underground tunnel to sneak into a roller skating race. Like that's the kind of thing that will probably never happen again. But regardless of how these kids got in, Donovan is now an icon to them. Like this simple newsboy is crushing these aristocrats, and the working class children of NYC are here to see it happen. Like at one point, Maddox, still wearing his roller skating medals, like comes off the track and hobbles over to a bench to get some medical attention from his trainers, and like a couple of the street boys are watching him, and one of the boys elbows the other and says, "Hey, that guy there came here to try and catch some suckers, but he's certainly not finding any." These boys, they also have apparently started pulling pranks on the other audience members. Like now they're going around tying ropes to the chairs of sleeping spectators, and then they yank super hard on the rope and yoink the chair right out from underneath whoever the poor sleeper is. But hey, we still got a hotly contested contest going on here too. Amelia and Maddox are tied for third. Amelia is calling a shot now. He's telling all the reporters that he is sick of skating behind the main champion. He's coming after him. Amelia's trainers are like lockstep behind him too. They've even got like a bed rigged up just off the side of the track so Amelia won't lose any time crossing the street. If he needs to go take a rest, he can just come off, snooze right there, and then get back up and hit the track again. Maddox, for his part though, he's trying to take this battle super seriously too. He's making sure to only go rest when Amelia also comes off the track. But despite the strategy and the determination, Maddox just doesn't have the body to keep up with the 15-year-old anymore. He's out there looking like he's gonna pitch over and collapse again at any moment. And so, by 9 a.m., as snow falls down from the sky, Amelia breaks the tie and puts a 3-mile gap between Maddox and himself. And to be honest with you, that's kind of the last major event of the race. There will be no other changes in the positioning of the top skaters. And the racers themselves can kind of feel the stagnation in the air too. Like nobody is really pushing that hard anymore. Maddox is too tired to catch Amelia. Amelia is too far from Boyce. Shock has no chance of catching anyone. And Donovan is just so unbelievably far ahead from second place that there's no point in even trying to beat him. Over 1,000 miles now. That is just crazy. And Donovan's got over his like delusion from earlier too. And now he's actually just like slowly circling the track with Amelia, just talking and laughing and reminiscing on the race. Boyce and Amelia also, they start like skating backwards for a bit, trying to give the crowd a little show. Meyer is gliding around with like a derby and a flower pinned to his chest, and 6 hours go by and nothing really changes. Everybody's just kind of coasting. Amelia, Boyce, and Donovan now, they're all circling the rink together, arm in arm, like basking in the admiration of the audience and the glow of finishing such a grueling contest. And Shock, our good friend, he's out there today in a brand new velvet suit, just trying to look his best. Although, of course, he's still going real slow around the track. In fact, the only guy who's pushing at all is Walton, the champion lazy man. He's out on the track looking just as good on day 6 as he did on day 1. And he's skating like he's got something to prove too. He's taking off like a cannon, blowing through 2 laps in less than a minute. He keeps on like skating up to other racers, challenging them to little mini races and then blowing them out of the water, no problem. Like he's passing all the other skaters at his leisure, really getting the crowd worked up and like dominating the rest of the competition in these like short little spurts. But I don't know, Walton. I think I know exactly what you're trying to do here. I think I got you figured out. You're just trying to prove that you could have won this race easily if you really wanted to. You're just trying to show the crowd that you're the best skater and that if you would really put your mind to it, you'd be smoking all these other guys. But man, it just does not work like that. You don't get to sleep for 8 hours a night and then race guys that have been sleeping for 3 a night and act like beating them for like 2 laps somehow proves that you're the better skater. Like no, Shock and Donovan and Amelia and all those other guys, they've put in the real effort in on this race. You can't just like sneak in here real stealthy like and act like you could have kicked their butts if you wanted to. Like no, for all we know, you could have been terrified of really trying for all 6 days and still coming up short. You're the kind of guy that would rather save face and get 11th than try real hard and get 3rd. And I don't respect that. Don't act like you're better than these guys that have been killing themselves for us. Anyway though, right around like 6 o'clock, Amelia and Maddox mutually decide to just quit racing. Like to them, there's no point in continuing and hurting themselves and pushing when the gaps between everybody are just so big. Like they'd rather just pull up and take it easy, because what's the point in trying when they're never gonna catch the guy in front of them? Which is what pretty much everyone is doing at this point. Walton just like leaves the track and puts regular clothes on. Maddox takes his skates off and starts just standing around the garden. Amelia asks if he can go join a polo game that's happening on the other side of the arena. Like nobody wants to skate anymore. The only problem though is that this race is supposed to go until midnight and it's only 10:15. So the head judge and scorer just reaches down to the clock and uses his finger to push the hour hand around until it reaches the big number 12. Oh, everybody, 12 o'clock. Look at the official scorer's timer. It's 12 o'clock. Go home. Race is over. I know, it's kind of it's a little anticlimactic for such an exciting race. And the crowd agrees too. Like there is no applause whatsoever in the arena when they announce that this thing is over. The crowd even starts booing and hissing, and it takes a while for people to like even understand what's going on. Like they don't even get that this is real, that the race is actually over 2 hours early. But once they do, there they go, back out into the streets of New York. Nothing left to watch. But before the reporters sign off, we do get to hear some truly touching detail about Donovan, the winner of our contest. You see, as Donovan rounds the bend that final time, the event promoter just reaches out and hands him a check for $500, which is about the equivalent of 15 grand today. Donovan, he just takes the money and stares at the check. He cannot believe this is real. This is more cash than the teenage newsboy has ever seen in his life. This kid started the week borrowing clothes, and now he stands the hero of hundreds of young boys just like him. Suddenly, Donovan just takes off and he starts to round the track again. This time, not to try and like outskate any competitors, but to hide the tears that are streaming down his face. According to Donovan, he has never suffered more in his entire life. But it's worth it. He's a star. His trainers tell reporters that they plan to back him up in any roller skating race he wants to compete in. They even want to like take him across the Atlantic so he can go like enter races over in the United Kingdom. Like no longer just a newsboy, Donovan is a legit professional athlete now. Like this is life-changing stuff. But beyond Donovan, we also get some brief updates on what happened to the other skaters after the race. Like Boyce is laid up in bed resting. By all accounts, he should be okay in a day or two. We don't get to hear too much about Shock, but it seems like he's surprisingly recuperating nicely. Amelia, that little like 15-year-old kid, is apparently doing great. Like the next day, he's up bright and early and he decides to go on a horseback ride through Central Park. Maddox, though, is not resting. He's actually out in the streets of New York, leading a small army of ex-competitors through the city, complaining with vigor and much profanity about how the race performers have screwed them over. And honestly, good for them, because that $50 thing is a ripoff. Like if I roller skated for somebody for 6 days and then they withheld $3,000 from me that they promised, I'd be pissed too. Unfortunately, though, I wasn't able to find out if Maddox and the others ever got the money they were promised, but we can sure hope they did. But all right, I know there's probably an elephant in the room right now. You're probably remembering that I mentioned at the start of the video that 2 of our skaters would die as a result of this race. Well, I guess it's finally time to talk about that. You see, shortly after the conclusion of this contest, 2 of our 33 men would succumb to the exhaustion and the wounds that they sustained over the course of this roller skating race. Now, before I tell you who they are, I want to make it very clear that their deaths basically signaled the end of this specific form of 6-day roller skating race. Like, after these 2 men die, tons of newspaper articles are printed calling for a blanket ban on this kind of race. And some of these articles are like truly hardcore about it too, like using words like horror and atrocity to describe the event, like inhuman, senseless contest, like stuff like that. And for the most part, they kind of get what they want. Like there are very few 6-day roller skating races in history after this one. And all of the ones that do happen are forced to abide by like some pretty heavy rule changes. The most important being that minors are no longer allowed to compete in the races, which leaves our 6-day Madison Garden contest as the world's first and only 6-day, no rules, skate as long as you want, teenagers are allowed, roller skating race. But all right, enough stalling before we get to the sad part. The first man to die is someone that we haven't really talked too much about, Cohen, that grocery store clerk who entered the race to try and make a little money for his wife and kids. Well, just about a week after the conclusion of the race, Cohen, who had barely been able to get out of bed since he got off the track, just passed away right there in bed. And Cohen's family, they actually got like a coroner's jury to come and take a look at the body. And by the end of the investigation, the jury has determined that Cohen died of acute spinal meningitis caused directly by competition in the race. So predictably, the jury recommends an immediate ban on long-distance roller skating. The real sad thing, though, is that Cohen had no real delusion about what he was doing out there. He wasn't going out for first place. He wasn't trying to be some like famous athlete. He really just wanted that promised $50 incentive that ended up getting stolen from him. And we even get one like particularly sad quote from Cohen's widow. "The fact that he didn't get his money killed my husband. He had stuck it out so well. Do you think I can get it? I haven't got a cent in the world." It really just makes you hate the promoters even more, huh? And now for the second death, which is Donovan. Yeah, it's a little heartbreaking to say. Probably a little surprising too, but it happened. You see, right after the race, Donovan's coaches, they take him across the street to the sleeping house and they start taking off his skates and his socks and They just almost throw up when they look at his leg. Because for who knows how long, Donovan has been hiding this hideous wound underneath his stocking. He's got a massive bleeding sore running from the bottom of his foot all the way up to his knee, and it's apparently so deep that you could almost see the shin bone. And to make it even worse, the bright red dye from Donovan's stockings has soaked into the wound, and it's basically just effectively poisoned the poor guy. And unfortunately from there, Donovan just got worse and worse and worse until he died a couple weeks later. And again, doctors say that the race specifically was to blame. But again, even on his deathbed, Donovan still proves to be a remarkable kid. He tells his coaches that he's going to get better soon, any minute now, and he's going to go out there and he's going to win another race so he can pay them back for their kindness and the money that they've spent on him. And then later in the day, when Donovan finally realizes that he's about to die, he reaches under his pillow and he pulls out that gold medal that he won in the Madison Square Garden contest. And he reaches out his hand and he hands it to one of the trainers and says, "Here you are, Tom. This is the only thing I have to give you." Then he turns to the other trainer so that he can apologize for not having anything to give to him. And then he dies, just like that. It's pretty crazy to think about. I mean, Donovan never got to enjoy the new life that he had earned. He roller skated himself to death and then slipped away into the pages of history like nothing ever happened. Nobody knows his name. Nobody knows what he did. Well, guess what, Donnie? You got a fan in me. Thank you for watching.